Beside my brothers and my sisters, I will proudly take a stand. When liberty's in jeopardy, I will always do what's right.
You hate to think that war is what drives technology, but it does. Even Hippocrates, the father of medicine, recognized this fact nearly 2,000 years ago when he said, "If you want to study medicine, go to war." Throughout history, the motivation to create functional replacement limbs has grown in parallel with the number of living amputees, whose ranks swelled following periods of warfare. The purpose of this documentary is twofold. First, it tells the stories of the untold generations of battle-scarred amputees whose sacrifices made prosthetics a public priority. Second, it tells what you can do to help our wounded warriors with their struggle for independence.
When the shot heard round the world was fired at Lexington in 1775 to begin the Revolutionary War, there was not yet even a continental army. Few Americans had any military experience, and there was no method of training, supplying, or even paying an army. The 13 colonies were ill-prepared for the mass casualties that they were about to suffer over the next 8 years. At least 25,000 American patriots died during this military conflict from 1775 to 1783. As was typical in the wars of the era, disease claimed far more lives than battle. Upwards of 12,000 soldiers died of starvation or disease while prisoners of war. The number of patriots seriously wounded or disabled by the war has been estimated as high as 25,000. Proportionate to the population of the colonies, the Revolutionary War was at least the second deadliest conflict in American history, ranking ahead of World War II and behind the Civil War. During the Revolutionary War, anyone with medical knowledge was pressed into service. Each regiment brought its own physician, but these hometown doctors varied in ability. Less than 300 had a medical degree. Despite this varied training, Revolutionary War surgeons did a notable job of attempting to save lives. Most wounds were caused by musket balls or the bayonet. In cases where the bone was damaged so severely that a limb could not be saved, the surgeon performed an amputation without the type of anesthesia or sterilization we know today. In performing an amputation, officers received rum and brandy when it was available, but for enlisted men, a wooden stick to bite down on had to suffice. A competent surgeon could saw through the bone in less than 45 seconds, but only 35% of the persons who went through this procedure survived.
Deep in a veil, a stranger now to arms, too poor to shine in courts, too proud to beg. He, who once warred on Saratoga's plains, sits musing over his scars and wooden leg. Philip Freneau's poem, The American Soldier, written in 1806, clearly echoes the American veterans' frustrations with the sad state of affairs after the Revolutionary War, when amputees were pitied, ignored, or actually destined to die because of limited medical care.
A real breakthrough in prosthetic limb mechanics came in the form of James Pott's Angalesi leg design around 1800. This style was popularized by the Marquis of Angalesi after his leg was smashed by grape shot during the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. James Pott's prosthetic leg design, which relied on catgut tendons to hinge at the knee and ankle, simulated a walking motion when the toe was lifted. In 1846, this design was improved by Benjamin Palmer with his so-called American leg, which incorporated a heel spring and was continuously produced through World War I.
When Abraham Lincoln won election in 1860 as the first Republican president on a platform pledging to keep slavery out of the territories, 7 slave states in the Deep South succeeded and formed a new nation, the Confederate States of America. The first shot of the Civil War occurred when the Confederate Army opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Bay on April 12, 1861. When President Lincoln called out the militia to suppress this insurrection, 4 more slave states succeeded and joined the Confederacy. By the end of 1861, nearly 1 million armed men confronted each other along a battlefront stretching 1,200 miles from Virginia to Missouri. For 3 long years, from 1862 to 1865, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia staved off invasions and attacks by the Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by a series of ineffective generals, until Ulysses S. Grant came to Virginia from the Western Theater to become General-in-Chief of all Union armies in 1864. After bloody battles at places with the names like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, and Pittsburgh, Grant finally brought Lee to bay at Appomattox in April 1865, ending the Civil War. The long-accepted death toll for the American Civil War has been 620,000. However, new evidence suggests that the death toll may have actually ranged from 640,000 to 700,000. Approximately 1 in 4 soldiers that went to war never returned home. At the outset of the Civil War in 1861, neither army had mechanisms in place to handle the amount of death that the nation was about to experience. The largest human catastrophe in American history, the Civil War, forced the young nation to confront death and destruction in a way that has not been equaled before or since. The rifle, musket, and the Manet bullet are thought to account for around 90% of Civil War casualties. In the heat of battle, doctors often had to make quick diagnosis of soldiers' injuries. Approximately 70% of all wounds were to the extremities, 35.6% to the upper extremities, and 35.2% to the lower extremities. By war's end, Union and Confederate surgeons had performed an estimated 70,000 amputations. 1 in 13 surviving Civil War soldiers returned home missing 1 or more limbs. The survival rate for primary amputations conducted within 48 hours was about 75%. Secondary amputations performed after 48 hours had a survival rate of approximately 50%. Due to gonorrhea or blood poisoning developing in the wound. Although surgeons use ether and chloroform routinely as anesthetics, surgery was performed with unwashed hands and unclean instruments, resulting in affected wounds.
Many soldiers, like Private William Sargent, continued to don their uniforms after their amputations. Both the North and the South worried about the negative consequences that would arise if disabled soldiers did not return to work and provide for themselves. The creation of the Invalid Corps, later renamed the Veteran Reserve Corps, allowed amputees and other wounded soldiers to serve as aides in the Army or to return to combat if their injuries were not too severe. Taking care of amputees put a significant strain on both wartime governments. As early as 1862, the Union government began allocating resources for wounded veterans to purchase an artificial armor leg. The Union provided its disabled soldiers with prosthetic limbs made of corkwood, metal, or rubber, and gave amputees $8 a month as a pension. Several Confederate states followed suit in 1864. Incredibly, Mississippi's single greatest state expenditure a year after the war ended was the purchase of artificial limbs for its veterans, which consumed 20% of the state's budget. Payments between $50 and $75 covered the cost of the prosthesis, as well as any required travel costs needed to have the soldiers outfitted with this new limb. Private George W. Lemon was among the soldiers who elected to use a prosthesis. A large portion of veterans in both the North and the South did not wear their artificial limbs. Many did not even apply for the money they were eligible to collect because of their negative aversion to the idea of charity. Moreover, the pinning up of an empty sleeve or trouser leg, instead of hiding the injury with a prosthesis, made their sacrifice visible. In America, the major pressure to improve amputee rehabilitation came along with the Civil War. Entrepreneurs, many of them young veterans themselves, recognized the opportunities to create improved mechanical devices that would allow amputees to enjoy more normal lives. Ironically, the person who launched the era of modern prosthetics was also the first documented amputee of the Civil War, Confederate soldier James Edward Hanger. After losing his own leg to a cannonball, Hanger was first fitted with a wooden peg leg by Yankee surgeons. Unhappy with the cumbersome appendage, Hanger eventually designed and built a new lightweight leg that helped him to sit more comfortably and to walk with a more natural gait. After the Civil War, Hanger received a contract from the Commonwealth of Virginia to furnish the prosthetic to the state's wounded veterans. In 1871, he obtained the first of several U.S. patents related to the production of the artificial leg. The business moved to Washington, D.C. in 1888 and quickly branched out to other U.S. cities. Offices were then opened in Europe during World War I, so the company could provide artificial limbs to both the French and the English armies.
The United States' entry into World War I came in April 1917, after German U-boats started sinking American ships in the North Atlantic. The Great War, as it was called at the onset of the conflict in 1914, initially pitted Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire against Great Britain, France, and Russia. Never have tactics and technology changed so radically in 4 years of fighting. It was a time of extraordinary innovation. Both sides were now armed with flamethrowers, portable machine guns, and grenades fired from rifles. Above the battlefields, airplanes dueled in the skies, some carrying experimental wireless radio sets reporting real-time reconnaissance. Huge artillery pieces fired with pinpoint accuracy. Using only aerial photos and math computations, they could score a hit on the first shot. Tanks had gone from the drawing board to the battlefield in just 2 years, also changing warfare forever. With the onset of World War I, the need for prosthetics escalated exponentially. As this was the first war in which industrialized weaponry like machine guns created more bodily harm than infection or disease, an extraordinary number of soldiers survived with severe injuries. By the time World War I ended in November 1918, more than 9 million combatants on both sides had been killed and 21 million more wounded. At least 116,516 American soldiers died during active military service from April 1917 to November 1918. The number of American doughboys seriously wounded or disabled by the war exceeded 204,000. Over 4,000 amputations were performed on U.S. service members during World War I. The American Expeditionary Force's relatively late involvement in World War I led to reliance on the experience of the British and French physicians on the Allied side. A half-century of improved surgical and antiseptic techniques meant, from the time of the Civil War to World War I, the rate of major amputations as a percent of all battle injuries had decreased from 12% to just 1.7%. Post-operative care also improved with 7 amputee centers established across the United States to provide specialized surgery, therapy, and prosthetics. Virtually every prosthetic device produced today to replace lost body parts of soldiers returning from our modern wars has its roots in the technological advances that emerged from World War I. The Great War, which began more than 100 years ago, produced its own crop of bionic men. In previous wars, severely injured soldiers often succumbed to gangrene and infection. Thanks to better surgery, many now survived. In all nations involved in the war, an emerging generation of amputees loomed ominously over the pension and welfare system, and many government bureaucrats, military leaders, and civilians worried about their long-term fate. One solution was returning maimed soldiers to the workforce. Various artificial limbs were designed to make that possible, pushing prosthesis manufacturing in many countries from a cottage industry towards modern mass production. In the United States, the Artificial Limb Laboratory was established in 1917 at the Walter Reed General Hospital in conjunction with the Army Medical School, with the goal to give every amputee soldier a modern limb, enabling them to return to the workplace as able-bodied citizens. A lost arm or hand was especially difficult to replace. American engineers designed a mechanical arm for that purpose. The Carnes arm was not optimal for mechanical work, but it imitated the natural limb. Since it was relatively easy to mass-produce cheaply, it became a huge business success after World War I.
At the end of World War I, an obscure German soldier named Adolf Hitler lay grieving in a military hospital for wounds he suffered as a member of the 16th Bavarian Reserve Regiment. Corporal Hitler's experiences in World War I and the anger and sense of betrayal that they caused was the catalyst for him to build up the Nazi Party, become Chancellor of Germany, and launch World War II. Although World War II began in Europe in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, the United States did not enter the war until December 1941 following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. U.S. troops then went on to fight in North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. On August 15, 1945, Japan formally surrendered and World War II came to an end. A new age of nuclear weapons had begun, and a Cold War between the two superpowers that emerged from the war, the United States and the Soviet Union, would result in many surrogate wars in the decades to come. World War II took more lives than any other war in history, perhaps 60 million lives in all. More civilians than soldiers died in the war. It also was the most destructive war in history. American military deaths during World War II totaled 405,399. The number of U.S. military personnel wounded totaled 670,846. There were an estimated 16,000 amputations performed on American service members as a result of the war. Although the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs has been a cabinet-level agency only since 1989, the process it uses to provide prosthetics to veterans has its roots in World War II. When President Truman appointed General Omar Bradley to head the Veterans Administration on August 15, 1945, Bradley immediately began to modernize and restructure that antiquated organization to meet the challenges it would soon face. Bradley's sweeping changes for the VA came about based on the needs of the 17 million veterans that were now on its rolls. The total number of seriously disabled was unprecedented in American history. The VA under Bradley's reforms broke new ground in developing and establishing methods to treat these vast numbers of disabled veterans. The Army and the VA spent millions of dollars to research and develop better, more functional artificial limbs. Today, the Veterans Administration has approximately 40,000 amputees currently receiving services in the VA healthcare system.
The Korean War began in 1950 when the North Korean Communist Army crossed the 38th parallel and invaded non-communist South Korea. As the North Korean Army, armed with Soviet tanks, quickly overran South Korea, the United Nations came to South Korea's aid. General Douglas MacArthur, who had been overseeing the post-World War II occupation of Japan, took command of the United Nations forces and recaptured Seoul, the capital of South Korea. Then MacArthur crossed the 30th parallel and pursued the North Korean army all the way to the northernmost provinces of North Korea. Afraid that the U.S. would take North Korea as a base for operations against Manchuria, Communist China sent an army across the Yalu River and attacked the United Nations forces. Only after the appointment of General Matthew Ridgway as commander of ground forces did American morale improve, and the initiative began to swing against the Chinese Communists. In 1953, a peace treaty was signed that ended the Korean War, returning Korea to a divided status essentially the same as before the war. Neither the war nor its outcome did much to lessen the era's Cold War tension. When the Korean War abruptly began in 1950, the U.S. Army Medical Department was in the process of reorganizing based on experiences of World War II. Combat medics worked effectively to stabilize the 103,284 wounded American soldiers in Korea before they were transported by helicopter and truck. New Mobile Army Surgical Hospitals, or MASH units, were developed rapidly to provide resuscitative surgical care within 10 miles of the front lines. Helicopter ambulance companies supported the MASH, allowing treatments of patients within 3 to 12 hours of wounding. The nature of combat and improvements in evacuation during the Korean War allowed for development of fixed hospitals. Although MASH units continued to provide care, the hospitals grew from 60 beds at the beginning of the Korean War to 200-bed fixed hospitals as the fighting settled into trench warfare by 1952. In the Korean conflict, limb salvage was emphasized, and rather than amputate extremity arterial injuries, surgeons now attempted direct vascular repair and arterial replacement. Rapid evacuation combined with specialized and stable hospital care produced better results than in World War II.
Ever since the end of World War II, the United States and Soviet Union had been in the midst of a worldwide struggle for spheres of influence. Southeast Asia in general and Vietnam in particular were important spheres of influence to the US and Soviet leaders. With the fall of North Vietnam to communism in 1954, the United States became committed to stopping the further spread of communism in the region. The escalation period of the Vietnam War from 1959 to 1965 mirrored the Cold War in that the United States and USSR avoided direct conflict by operating through proxy governments and forces. Unfortunately, for the United States, the US-backed South Vietnamese government was weak, while the Soviet-backed North Vietnamese government was willing to fight endlessly against foreign dominance and for Vietnamese unification. By the end of the war in 1975, the U.S. military had used 7 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, more than all the bombs dropped on Europe and Japan during World War II. The ultimate human cost of the Vietnam War was enormous for all sides. An estimated 2 million Vietnamese civilians, 1.1 million North Vietnamese soldiers, 200,000 South Vietnamese soldiers, and 58,000 U.S. soldiers were killed. In addition, a staggering total of 303,704 American soldiers were wounded during this war. The North Vietnamese relied heavily on machine gun fire, booby traps, and mines, and the nature of weaponry led to increased rates of major amputation, which rose to 3.4% of all battle injuries, compared to 1.2% in World War I and 1.4% in Korea. During the Vietnam War, surgical specialists in small medical units close to the combat zone could provide specialized, definitive surgical care more rapidly, sometimes within 1 to 2 hours of injury, though 4 to 6 hours were more common. Rapid helicopter transport and specialized surgical care saved the lives of soldiers who would have died in previous conflicts on the battlefield or during transport.
It was with disbelief and shock that people around the world saw footage of the terrorist attacks in the United States on September 11, 2001, when the plane-turned missiles slammed into the World Trade Center towers and damaged the Pentagon. This ultimately resulted in the United States launching a global war on terror, first against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan in 2001, and then against Saddam Hussein and Iraq in 2003. In nearly 14 years of fighting our war on terror, American troops have suffered over 6,400 deaths, including Staff Sergeant Anissa Shero and Airman First Class Elizabeth Jacobson. More than 52,000 U.S. military personnel have been wounded. In these modern-day conflicts, explosions cause 87.9% of all injuries. Body armor combined with rapid transport to medical units with advanced surgical capabilities has allowed medical personnel to save the lives of soldiers with critical chest and other injuries that would have been lethal in earlier wars. More than 95% of troops wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq have survived. The extremities remain vulnerable, however, and 70.5% of all injuries sustained in these conflicts have been major limb injuries. The number of amputations in Afghanistan and Iraq have been more than 1,600. About 18% of these amputees have more than one extremity amputation, much higher than rates recorded from World War I through Korea, but on par with Vietnam.
When the National Academy of Sciences established the Artificial Limb Program in 1945, there were two options for amputees: crude wooden prosthesis or life confined to a wheelchair. Fast forward 70 years, and the United States faces an influx of amputees from the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, but the opportunities for soldiers returning home from war with an amputation are far more advanced. Here are some of the most important advancements in robotic prosthetics in the last 25 years that give artificial limbs more function than ever before. Wood used to be the dominant material for a prosthesis, but materials have emerged over the last 25 years that give greater comfort and confidence for amputees. Carbon fiber is a much more lifelike material than wood, giving amputees a sense of life in their foot. Thermoplastic sockets give amputees extended comfort at the site of prosthesis is fitted, and titanium provides longer life and durability. Bluetooth is more often recognized for its ability to connect pieces of technology together without the use of wires. Bluetooth devices can communicate with each other to regulate stride, pressure, and speed in the prosthetic legs. The benefit of Bluetooth technology is the programmability of the software. We can take the technology and further develop it to adjust it to a patient's need. With an onboard computer within the prosthesis, people with above-knee amputations have greater control over walking, stopping, and moving on inclines. These microprocessor knees analyze the pressure an amputee puts on the missing limb. Microprocessor knees have revolutionized the arenas of safety and stability for people without knees. People that receive the prosthesis don't have to worry about the knee buckling under them. Myoelectric prosthetics are controlled by placing muscle sensors against the skin at the site of amputation. The electric signals generated by the muscle at an amputee's stump controls a processor aboard the prosthetic. This myoelectric technology allows for greater control and precision in the 5 fully functional digits, enabling recipients to perform everyday tasks. Amputees are in the infant stages of controlling prosthetics directly with their minds. Through targeted muscle reinnervation, the nerves from the amputated limb are re-energized in a different part of the body, for example, the chest. When an amputee wants to use their arm in a particular fashion, he or she thinks about the action, promoting the nerves in the chest to react. That reaction sends a message to a microprocessor in the robotic limb, which performs the action. The complex issue of treating extremity war injuries has concerned military doctors and surgeons throughout the ages. During the dawn of this nation, amputation was the mainstay of treatment, but was associated with terrible consequences. Civil War surgeons also relied heavily on amputation as a primary surgical treatment for extremity issues. The greatest success in limb salvage began during the World War II era with the arrival of antibiotics, which allowed for infection control and internal fixation. From Vietnam to the present, reliance on amputation as a primary treatment was declined. Amputation is still used in dire circumstances and gives injured soldiers the opportunity for improved quality of life with a prosthetic device. Advances in robotics and prosthetics today suggest the future is promising for our wounded warriors. A shining example is Melissa Stockwell. This U.S. Army first lieutenant was the first woman soldier to lose a limb in the Iraq War when a roadside bomb exploded while she was leading a convoy in Baghdad. Today, Stockwell is a reigning two-time para-triathlon world champion. She is also a certified prosthesis, triathlon coach, and motivational speaker. Melissa says that she hopes to inspire other amputees. Many amputees stay active to prove to themselves that losing a limb cannot hold them back.
In 2005, Joey Smith, a Marine sergeant, lay in a Veterans Affairs hospital racked with pain as he watched the other wounded veterans around him suffering, despondent and without hope. Smith was at the lowest point in his life. A year earlier, he had been working alongside Afghan soldiers when two of them intentionally pushed a storage container on top of him. For the next 4 years, Smith was transferred to multiple hospitals where he underwent 3 spinal cord surgeries as well as one on his leg. Doctors told him he was lucky to be alive. He also lost the use of his voice for those 4 years, but using pen and paper, he wrote the Wounded Warrior Creed that helped inspire others. Though I am wounded, I will always be a warrior. I will never give up nor quit in the face of adversity. I will do my best in all that I do and achieve. I will not allow my injuries to limit me, and most of all, I will never forget my fallen comrades or leave a fellow injured warrior behind. Smith followed his creed by entering the 2010 Wounded Warrior Games and has returned to the games every year since, winning a bronze medal in archery in 2013.
When a service member becomes an amputee, they are faced with staggering emotional and financial lifestyle changes. The costs associated with a modern prosthetic device can range from $10,000 to more than $100,000. Although the Veterans Administration provides such prosthetic devices free of charge, our wounded warriors still need financial assistance during their long struggle for independence. After extensive research into the many organizations that help wounded veterans, the Kainu chapter of Phi Theta Kappa has decided to devote our fundraising efforts to the Semper-Fi Fund and its affiliated Americas Fund for the following reasons. The Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund provide immediate financial assistance and lifetime support to post-9/11 wounded members of all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces and their families, ensuring that they have the resources they need to help them recover. The Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund have been awarded the highest ratings from watchdog groups: A+ top-rated charity from Charity Watch, one of only 3 veteran nonprofits to receive this rating in recent years, and 4 stars from Charity Navigator, a rating only given to 4% of all charities. The Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund maintain an extremely low overhead of 6%, and they provide rapid assistance with no red tape. Since its inception in 2004, the Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund have issued more than 97,500 grants, totaling more than $113 million in assistance to over 14,400 of our heroes and their families. In addition to financial assistance, the Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund provide our wounded warriors with the following programs designed to help with their recovery and transition back to their communities: service member and family support, adaptive housing support, adaptive transportation, specialized and adaptive equipment, canine companions, education and career transitioning, rehabilitative sports programs, therapeutic arts, and kids camp. The Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund have been successful over the years thanks to their loyal supporters. Yet their challenges continue to intensify due to the level of the severity of injury, illness, and post-traumatic stress unique to the length of the war on terrorism. These critical injuries are brought home and often call for a lifetime of assistance. Tax-deductible contributions from people like you make up the lifeblood of the Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund. Whether donations are large or small, a one-time gift or ongoing endowment, every individual has the power to make a real difference. The Semper-Fi Fund and the Americas Fund are forever grateful to each of their supporters who share in their ongoing mission. Please help the Semper-Fi Fund or its affiliated Americas Fund help those who have given so much in the name of freedom. The Semper-Fi Fund donations will go to Marines and sailors, past and present, while the America's Fund donations will go to service members, past and present, of all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. On behalf of the Chi Nu chapter of Phi Theta Kappa on the Melbourne campus of Eastern Florida State College, we would like to thank all of the men and women who have served or are serving in all branches of the military. We would also like to thank you, our audience, for any donations you can make to the Semper Fi Fund or its affiliated America's Fund to help our wounded warriors with their struggle for independence. Last but not least, we would like to thank the Brevard Veterans Council for allowing us to use the Brevard Veterans Memorial Center and Park in Merritt Island, Florida during the filming of our documentary and for helping us with our fundraising efforts.
I'm just trying to be a father, raise a daughter and a son, be a lover to their mother, everything to everyone, up and at 'em bright and early. I'm all business in my suit. Yeah, I'm dressed up for success, from my head down to my boots. I don't do it for the money, there's bills that I can't pay. I don't do it for the glory, I just do it anyway. Providing for our futures, my responsibility. Yeah, I'm real good under pressure, being all that I can be. I can't call in sick on Mondays when the weekend's been too strong. I just work straight through the holidays, sometimes all night long. You can bet that I stand ready when the wolf growls at the door. Hey, I'm solid, hey, I'm steady, hey, I'm true down to the core. And I will always do my duty, no matter what the price. I've counted up the cost, I know the sacrifice. Oh, and I don't want to die for you, but if dying's asking me, I bear that cross with honor, 'cause freedom don't come free. I'm an American soldier, an American. Beside my brothers and my sisters, I will proudly take a stand. When liberty's in jeopardy, I will always do what's right. I'm out here on the front line,